The castle was burning. Flames licked the centuries-old walls of Windsor, the air thick with smoke and disbelief. Firefighters rushed through the stone corridors where monarchs had once walked in procession. Paintings were carried out by hand, chandeliers dismantled, furniture lifted in panic. Among those forming a human chain to rescue treasures from destruction was the Queen's third child. A prince of the realm, still in his 30s, still convinced of his unshakable place in history. Before we dive in, there's something I need to share with you. Over the past few days, thousands have watched these stories unfold, but most haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, I invite you now to join us. Subscribe to Crownverse so you never miss the next chapter in this unfolding royal history. The year was 1992. It would come to be known as Queen Elizabeth II's Annus Horribilis, her year of turmoil. 3 royal marriages crumbled, a tell-all book exposed private lives, and now a fire had consumed the Queen's beloved Windsor Castle. For a monarch known for her composure, the sight was devastating. Witnesses recall her hand rising to cover her mouth, eyes glistening as black smoke rose above the turrets. The Queen, usually unreadable, could no longer hide her grief. But amid that chaos, amid a moment of collective loss and human vulnerability, one brief exchange would later capture something far more revealing than the flames themselves. According to veteran BBC correspondent Jenny Bond, who was reporting from Windsor that day, she approached Prince Andrew with a simple question. It was not political, not ceremonial, just human. "How is your mother doing?" she asked. Andrew's response, she later said, was cold and clipped. "Her Majesty the Queen, you mean." He corrected her as though formality outweighed empathy, as though the correct title mattered more than the question itself. For many who heard the story years later, it was a small but telling moment, an unguarded glimpse into the mind of a man who seemed unable to separate identity from hierarchy. Reports have long described Prince Andrew as preoccupied with status. Former aides, cited in biographies like The Rise and Fall of the House of York by historian Andrew Lonely, recall his insistence on strict deference. Aides were allegedly chastised for minor breaches of etiquette, a forgotten bow, an incorrect title, an informal tone. In one account, Andrew is said to have rebuked an assistant who referred to the Queen Mother without her full style, calling them, in his words, a fucking imbecile. None of this was officially confirmed, but the pattern has been echoed in numerous testimonies and memoirs from those who worked within the royal orbit. The portrait that emerges is not merely of arrogance, but of a man trapped within the rigid scaffolding of monarchy. At Windsor in 1992, while the Queen confronted the sight of her heritage in ashes, Andrew seemed more concerned that decorum remain intact. His rebuke to Jenny Bond might have seemed trivial, even pedantic, yet symbolically it spoke volumes. It was the reflex of someone raised in an environment where hierarchy defines worth, where the difference between the Queen and Her Majesty the Queen is not linguistic, but existential. To Andrew, protocol was not performance. It was identity. Even now, decades later, that same fixation echoes through his story. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, was once seen as the Queen's most charming son, a decorated naval officer, hero of the Falklands War, a bachelor prince with tabloid charisma. But over time, that image curdled. Reports of temper, entitlement, and indulgence began to surface. Former staff described a man who could be both charming and condescending, generous and volatile. And then, of course, came the scandal that eclipsed them all. his association with Jeffrey Epstein and the subsequent allegations that destroyed his public standing. The prince, who once commanded respect, became a symbol of royal disgrace. But what's striking is how the old reflexes persisted even as the ground beneath him shifted. In 2019, during his infamous BBC Newsnight interview, the same tone that once corrected Jenny Bond reappeared, defensive, aloof, and utterly tone-deaf to the gravity of the situation. When asked about empathy for Epstein's victims, he appeared detached, speaking as though addressing a minor inconvenience, not a moral reckoning. That same inability to read the room, to replace title with humility, resurfaced again in the years that followed. When King Charles III assumed the throne, efforts to modernize the monarchy intensified. Public scrutiny over royal finances grew louder. The question of accountability, once unthinkable, became unavoidable. In that climate, Prince Andrew's continued residence at Royal Lodge became a national controversy. The house, a 30-room mansion set in the heart of Windsor Great Park, had been leased to him by the Crown Estate in 2003 under a 75-year agreement. He paid an upfront premium, reportedly £1 million, and agreed to cover extensive renovations costing several million more. The rent itself? A peppercorn, a legal term meaning symbolic, effectively nothing. 22 years later, as reports emerged that Andrew had not paid rent in decades, outrage followed. Polls suggested that 80% of Britons believed he and Sarah Ferguson should vacate the property, yet legally, he could not be forced to leave so long as he maintained the lease's conditions. Behind palace doors, tension grew. King Charles, according to multiple reputable sources, urged his brother to downsize, to move into Frogmore Cottage, the former home of Harry and Meghan. Andrew refused. His reasoning, though never stated publicly, seemed consistent with his lifelong adherence to status. Royal Lodge was his symbol of rank, a vestige of the respect he once commanded. To give it up would be, in his eyes, to descend another rung on the invisible ladder that defines royal life. The details of his finances remain opaque. With his royal allowance cut off and his public role eliminated, few can say with certainty how he sustains his lifestyle. Yet the determination to hold his place, to preserve the trappings of his past position, remains unwavering. Observers have described this as tragicomic. A man who once stood beside world leaders, now negotiating the semantics of honorifics, the square footage of a house, the precise etiquette of respect. But perhaps the story of Andrew's obsession with status is not just about him. It reflects the institution that shaped him. The monarchy, by design, cultivates hierarchy. Children born within its walls are taught that titles are not decorations, but definitions. To lose one is not merely to be demoted, it is to vanish. For a system built on reverence, every curtsy, every "Your Majesty," every bow, is a small act of belief that sustains the crown itself.